Why Amish teenagers never touch a smartphone and what they do instead from dawn to dusk. But here's the part that will shock you. It's not about what they're avoiding. It's about what their brains are becoming instead. And by the end of this video, I'm going to show you the neurological advantage that modern teenagers are literally trading away without even knowing it. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about phones. It's about survival skills your ancestors built into their DNA, and why the Amish accidentally cracked a code that neuroscience is only now beginning to understand. If you've ever wondered how entire generations survived without electricity, how they built houses, grew food, and raised families using only daylight and their own two hands, you're in the right place. And if you're struggling to understand why your kids can't focus, why they're bored without screens, or why they feel lost without GPS, this video is for you. If this resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below telling me what's one skill your grandparents had that you wish you'd learned before it was too late. I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear your story. Now wait, this part is crucial, so I need your full attention for just a moment. Before we dive deeper, I want you to know that I've put together a complete ebook guide called The Lost Skills Manual: How Amish Wisdom Builds Unbreakable Focus and Survival Mastery. And it breaks down exactly how these daily routines rewire the teenage brain for deep work, problem solving, and what I call crisis intuition. It's available in the description below and pinned in the comments. This isn't a free guide. It's a comprehensive resource that walks you through the neurological science behind what you're about to see, plus the exact daily routines you can adapt for your own family. But for now, let's talk about what's actually happening in the Amish world. Most people think the Amish avoid phones because of some strict religious rule, a blanket ban written in scripture. That's not it at all. The real story is far more interesting, and it tells us something critical about how brains develop under pressure and purpose. The Amish practice something called Gelassenheit, which means letting go or yielding to God's will. But what that actually translates to in daily life is radical intentionality. Every tool, every activity, every moment of a teenager's day is filtered through one question. Does this strengthen our community? Does this make us more self-reliant? Does this teach resilience? A smartphone fails that test, not because it's evil or sinful in the abstract, but because it's engineered to fragment attention. And fragmented attention is the enemy of the three things that keep a family, a homestead, and eventually a civilization alive: skill building, situational awareness, and what I call mechanical intuition. Let me break down the actual day of an Amish teenager, and I want you to pay attention to the structure, because this is where the survival skill connection becomes obvious. An Amish teenager wakes up between 5 and 5:30 a.m. That's not because they're forced to. It's because the farm doesn't wait, and neither does their sense of purpose. There's no alarm clock argument. There's no dread. They wake because sleep has actually restored their body, because their phones didn't keep them scrolling until 2 a.m. First thing, chores. Not as punishment, as initiation. A 16-year-old girl might spend 2 hours milking dairy cows by hand. That's not busy work. Those 2 hours teach her hand strength, rhythm, observation skills, how to read an animal's mood, how to work when tired, patience under repetition, and what happens if you're careless. A cow won't cooperate. There's immediate biological feedback. A 16-year-old boy might spend 3 hours in the field with a scythe or hand rake, or in the workshop learning to read wood grain, to sharpen tools, to understand how force and leverage work without any motorized assistance. His attention isn't divided between 6 browser tabs. It's locked onto one material problem. How do I move this hay efficiently? How do I make this cut clean? How do I fix this fence so it doesn't fail? That is skill building in its purest form. And it's happening during the most neurologically plastic years of human development, ages 13 to 19, when the brain is literally reorganizing itself, strengthening neural pathways that match the demands of their environment. Here's where most conversations about the Amish stop. People say, oh, they work hard, that's noble, but they miss the neuroscience underneath. Every single one of these activities is building what researchers now call metacognitive resilience, which is just a fancy term for your brain's ability to stay calm, focused, and problem-solving when things go wrong. Think about it. When a cow doesn't cooperate, there's no debugging code. There's no customer service phone line. You have to read the animal, Adjust your approach, try again. If you fail in front of your family. If you succeed, you see the immediate result. That creates a feedback loop that a video game can never replicate. And here's the part that connects directly to survival. That same brain that learned to milk a cow without a machine has also learned the foundational skill of every survival situation: adaptation under uncertainty. By the time an Amish teenager reaches adulthood, they've logged approximately 15,000 to 20,000 hours of hands-on problem solving. That's before they're even 25 years old. Compare that to a typical American teenager, who logs roughly 7,000 hours of screen time in the same period, much of it passive consumption. They've practiced reading information, yes, but they haven't practiced making decisions under resource scarcity. They haven't practiced fixing something broken with only what's available. They haven't practiced staying mentally present when the task is hard and the payoff is invisible. And that's the survival skill that's being lost. By mid-morning, school. But Amish school is different. Most Amish teenagers attend one-room schoolhouses with maybe 30 kids, ages 6 through 16, one teacher. That one-room structure is not a limitation. It's a design. It teaches something that modern schools can't replicate: cross-age mentoring and independence in learning. A 13-year-old watching a 16-year-old work through a math problem doesn't just learn the problem, he learns the process of adult thinking. He sees what competence looks like up close. And a 16-year-old teaching a younger student doesn't just pass information. He's consolidating his own understanding while developing what's called theory of mind, the ability to imagine what someone else doesn't know and fill that gap. This is ancient apprenticeship learning. It's how humans transferred survival knowledge for thousands of years before books. And it's still working. School itself typically runs from around 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., and the curriculum is deliberately narrow: reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, German, and practical skills like sewing and woodwork. No STEM tests, no college prep, no anxiety about standing out or ranking against peers nationally. Instead, something else is happening, something that connects directly back to that survival framework I mentioned. The Amish teenager is building what I call a competency foundation. Not a breadth of fragmented knowledge from 100 different YouTube videos, but a deep, tested understanding of how materials work, how systems operate, and most importantly, how to learn independently. If an Amish teenager wants to know how to fix a plow, she doesn't Google it. She watches her father or an uncle. She asks questions. She tries. She fails. She adjusts. That cycle, try, fail, adjust, succeed, becomes her learning algorithm. It's installed in her neural hardware. Fast forward to afternoon, around 3:30 p.m. Most of them go straight back to work. Chores again. Feeding animals, tending gardens, helping with whatever the day demanded. And here's what's crucial. This isn't punishment for losing childhood hours to school. It's consistency. A modern teenager's brain is under constant context switching. They're in math class, then English, then lunch with friends, then home, then homework, then social media, then dinner, then texting. 5 or 6 different mental operating systems running in parallel. An Amish teenager's day has rhythm and repetition. Work, then school, then work. Same place, same people, same challenges with variations. That creates something called flow state, a psychological state where attention is completely absorbed and the brain is working optimally. Neurologist Csikszentmihalyi documented that flow states are where deep learning happens. They're also where stress resilience is built. When you're in flow, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for worry and self-doubt, actually quiets down. The smartphone, by contrast, is engineered to fragment flow. Every notification, every update, every swipe pulls your attention outward. Over time, that teaches the brain that constant distraction is normal, and that becomes a disability in any situation where focus matters, which, if you think about it, is every survival situation that exists. You can't be focused on your phone when you're reading animal behavior, or weather patterns, or building shelter. Those are all skills that require what's called attentional stamina, the ability to stay locked onto one problem for hours. An Amish teenager, by necessity and by culture, is building exactly that. Dinner happens early, around 5:30 or 6 p.m., and it's significant. This is not a meal where everyone's looking at screens. This is not a meal grabbed between activities. This is a full family gathering around a table with food that mostly came from their own work. Vegetables from the garden, meat from animals they raised, bread from flour they helped harvest. That table is a classroom in disguise. The family discusses the day's work. What worked, what didn't, what needs to happen tomorrow. Younger children watch older children talk through problems. Parents model how decisions get made. There's no "I'm too busy." No, "Let me check my phone real quick." And here's the cognitive benefit that neuroscience is only beginning to measure. That dinner conversation is building something called narrative competence. The ability to listen to a story, understand multiple perspectives, think ahead to consequences, and imagine solutions. That's not some soft skill. That's the cognitive foundation of survival. When your ancestors faced a winter without knowing if food would last until spring, they didn't panic blindly. They gathered, discussed what they knew, planned together, and executed. Narrative competence was literally the difference between survival and starvation. After dinner, evening work. Maybe an hour or two more depending on the season. During late spring and summer, that's still daylight. During winter, it's done by lantern light, which is dimmer and naturally creates a sense of boundaries. When it gets dark, you're done. You rest. That's another thing the smartphone has stolen, the natural rhythm of rest. An Amish teenager goes to bed around 8:30 or 9 p.m., not because of a rule, but because they're genuinely tired, and because there's nothing pulling them towards staying awake. Their circadian rhythm is synced with actual daylight and darkness, not with blue light and algorithmic engagement. Sleep quality is deeper, and that matters because sleep is where memory consolidation happens, where the skills learned that day actually get wired into long-term neural patterns. A modern teenager, by contrast, is often fighting their own biology. Blue light from screens tricks their brain into thinking it's daytime. Their cortisol levels stay elevated, they sleep poorly, and all the learning from that day doesn't integrate properly. So let's step back and look at the full picture of this teenager's day, because this is where the survival skill connection becomes undeniable. From 5:30 a.m. to 9 p.m., an Amish teenager is building. Attentional stamina, the ability to lock onto one problem for hours. That's foundational to any survival skill, from navigation to shelter building to food gathering. Mechanical intuition, an understanding of how physical systems work. Levers, leverage, friction, weight distribution, material properties. Not learned from videos, but from repeated, hands-on interaction with real materials under real conditions. Adaptability, the constant need to adjust plans based on weather, animal behavior, seasonal changes, tool failures. That's the core of survival thinking. Social resilience. They work in the presence of family and community every single day. They see how adults handle frustration, setbacks, and uncertainty. They practice communication in real conversations, not through text. Circadian alignment. Their sleep, wakefulness, and work are all synchronized with actual daylight and natural rhythms. Their bodies are not fighting their environment. Absence of social comparison. In a one-room school with 30 kids, you don't rank nationally. You don't have a feed of 1,000 peers showing off their best moments. You just work, and you learn, and you see real people doing real work around you. Now, here's what I want you to understand. I'm not saying all of this is exclusive to the Amish. I'm not saying that every teenager who doesn't have a smartphone automatically develops these skills. And I'm certainly not saying that everyone should abandon technology and go live on a farm. But I am saying this: the Amish have accidentally preserved a learning environment that neuroscience now confirms is optimal for building the exact capacities that survival demands. And those capacities are vanishing from the wider culture so rapidly that we're not even noticing what we've lost. A teenager raised without deep work, without hands-on problem solving, without attentional stamina, without real conversation, without sleep synced to daylight, that teenager has been primed for dependence. Not maliciously, just systematically, by design. If the grid goes down, if there's a genuine crisis, if resources become scarce, that teenager will panic, before that Amish teenager even acknowledges the situation is serious. And this brings us to the revelation I promised you at the beginning. It's not that the Amish are avoiding smartphones because they're ancient or anti-technology. It's that they've recognized something deeper, that the teenage brain is being shaped by its environment every single day, and that environment determines what kind of adult emerges. When you remove the distraction, what you reveal is not deprivation, it's clarity. The clarity to see what actually needs to be done, the clarity to stay present with a hard task, the clarity to understand that you're capable. That's the secret. That's what I meant when I said at the beginning that this isn't just about avoiding phones. It's about what the brain becomes instead. An Amish teenager becomes someone who can think, survive, adapt, and lead. Not because of ideology, but because of practice. Thousands of hours of it. And that is a skill that no amount of online learning can replace. Now here's where it gets interesting, and honestly, where most people get this completely wrong. The Amish aren't teaching their teenagers survival skills the way you might imagine. There's no formal curriculum, no wilderness survival week or outdoor education class. It's not structured like that at all. Instead, these skills are embedded in the daily rhythm. They emerge naturally from the work itself. Think about what happens when a 16-year-old is responsible for maintaining livestock during the winter. Not supervising, not helping, responsible. That animal's survival depends on their consistency, their problem-solving, their ability to read weather and predict scarcity. A failure to plan ahead in July means the animals go hungry in January. That consequence is real, it's immediate, and it teaches a lesson that no amount of classroom instruction ever could. Before we continue, keep this in mind for a second. This is actually one of the core principles we explore deeply in our comprehensive survival skills guide, available in the description and pinned comment below. The guide breaks down how these daily responsibilities become encoded as survival instinct, and how you can begin to rebuild those patterns in your own life, even in a modern setting. It's the framework behind everything you're seeing here. I'll link it at the end as well. Water purification in an Amish household isn't abstract either. An Amish teenager understands rainwater collection because they've watched it happen their entire life. They know that a barrel of standing water can become a breeding ground for mosquitoes and bacteria, not from a health textbook, but because they've had to maintain those barrels, clean them, and make decisions about when the water is safe to use. This is knowledge encoded in muscle memory and intuition. When an Amish teenager learns fire making, it's not a demonstration, it's necessity. A kitchen stove that requires constant tending. Wood that needs to be split, stacked, and dried. A fire that must be kept alive through the night in winter, or the house becomes uninhabitable. The skill isn't learned as a hobby. It's learned as survival infrastructure. And here's what's remarkable. By the time an Amish teenager is 18, they haven't just accumulated random survival facts. They've developed a complete framework for how to think about resource scarcity, planning, consequence, and adaptation. They understand that systems fail, that redundancy matters, that you can't just rely on one source for anything critical: water, food, heat, shelter, knowledge. An Amish community doesn't have a backup generator because the power goes out. They have multiple sources of light, heat, and power built into their infrastructure from the beginning. Candles, oil lamps, wood stoves, hand-crank tools. This isn't paranoia or nostalgia. It's practical resilience engineering. And that's exactly what most modern teenagers have never learned to think about. A typical modern teenager has never had to think about what happens if the system fails. Their water comes from a tap. Their heat comes from a thermostat. Their food comes from a store. Their entertainment and social connection come from a single device. If any of those systems fail, they're not just inconvenienced, they're genuinely lost. An Amish teenager, by contrast, has lived in a world where failure is a regular event and recovery is their responsibility. The barn door breaks. You fix it. The preserves spoil. You make new ones. The well gets contaminated. You find another source, or purify what you have. The horse goes lame. You manage the workload differently until it heals. These aren't crises. They're Tuesday. And that creates a completely different psychology. Modern psychology research has started to confirm what the Amish have known for centuries, that competence in the physical world creates confidence everywhere else. When you know you can build something, fix something, create something, survive something, that belief transfers into every area of your life. You're not anxious about your future because you already know what you're capable of. You're not searching for your identity online because you already know who you are in relationship to the people around you and the work in front of you. And you're not dependent on external validation because the validation is built into the work itself. The animal is alive because you kept it alive. The food is preserved because you preserved it. The house is warm because you maintained the fire. This is why the Amish don't forbid smartphones out of fear or judgment. They simply recognize that the teenage brain needs something different to become something functional, and that something is exactly what the modern world is designed to prevent. Now let's talk about the specific skills that emerge from this lifestyle, because this is where it becomes practical for you. Even if you're not Amish, and even if you can't completely reimagine your teenager's environment. The first major survival skill that develops naturally in this context is fire management. Not just fire starting, though that's critical. Fire management, understanding how fire behaves, how to control it, how to use it efficiently, and how to prevent it from becoming dangerous. An Amish teenager learns this because their family's heating, cooking, and hot water all depend on fire. A wood stove isn't forgiving. If you let the fire die, the house gets cold and you have to start over. If you build it wrong, it consumes wood inefficiently, and you run out before winter ends. So you learn to read the fire. You understand dry versus wet wood. You know how different types of wood burn and how hot they get. You can feel the temperature of the stove and know exactly how much wood to add and when to add it. By the time they're an adult, they can start a fire in almost any condition, using almost any available material. This is a survival skill that took our ancestors decades to master, and modern people often never learn at all. The second skill is water management and purification. In an Amish home, water is actively managed. You don't just turn on a faucet and assume it's clean. You collect rainwater. You know the well. You understand what makes water dangerous and what makes it safe. Boiling is the primary purification method, but an experienced Amish person also understands settling, allowing sediment to sink, and filtering through sand and charcoal. These are old-world water purification techniques that work without any modern equipment. This skill is literally life-saving in any scenario where municipal water becomes unavailable, whether that's a natural disaster, infrastructure failure, or simply being lost in the wilderness. Third is food preservation and storage. The Amish calendar is built around seasonal abundance and winter scarcity. When food is available, you preserve it. When food is scarce, you eat what you preserved. This requires understanding drying, smoking, fermentation, root cellar storage, and canning. Each method has specific principles. Drying removes moisture so bacteria and mold can't grow. Smoking combines heat, smoke, and sometimes salt to preserve meat. Fermentation creates an acidic environment where harmful bacteria can't survive, but beneficial bacteria thrive. An Amish teenager grows up understanding the science of this, not from a textbook, but from doing it hundreds of times. They know that a family of 6 needs about 2.000 pounds of food for winter. They know which crops store longest. They know how to build a root cellar that maintains the right temperature naturally. They know how to recognize when preserved food has spoiled and when it's still safe. This is the framework for food security without electricity, without refrigeration, without grocery stores. The fourth skill is shelter and adaptation. An Amish home isn't just a place to live, it's a system of thermoregulation and resource efficiency. In winter, heat is managed carefully through wood stoves placed strategically in the home. In summer, ventilation and window placement keep things cool without air conditioning. Teenagers learn to close off unused rooms to concentrate heat. They understand how to seal gaps and prevent drafts. They know the difference between a room that's comfortable and efficient versus one that's wasteful. If shelter becomes necessary in emergency or wilderness conditions, this knowledge transfers. You can build or modify shelter using available materials because you understand how buildings regulate temperature. The final skill is tool-making and handcraft capability. An Amish community doesn't replace broken tools. They repair them. And if they need a new tool and can't buy one, they make one. This requires understanding materials, Understanding leverage and mechanics. Understanding how metal behaves and how wood can be shaped. A teenager who grows up in this environment develops an intuition about problem solving through physical creation. They're not helpless when something breaks. They don't just discard it and buy a new one. They look at it, understand how it works, figure out how to fix it, and often make it better than it was originally. This is the opposite of learned helplessness. This is learned self-sufficiency. So here's what I want you to understand. These skills aren't special or secret. They're not the result of some hidden Amish wisdom that the rest of the world doesn't have access to. They're the natural result of growing up in an environment where survival skills aren't optional. They're the infrastructure of daily life. And that's the insight that changes everything. Because it means you don't have to raise your teenager in an Amish community to give them these skills. You have to create an environment where competence in the physical world is valued, expected, and necessary. That could look like a homestead. It could look like a garden. It could look like a workshop where actual projects get completed. It could look like encouraging your teenager to repair things instead of replacing them. It could even look like extended time in nature, where real challenges have to be solved with real skills. What it can't look like is a life where every need is met instantly, where competence is never tested, and where the only environment shaping the brain is a digital one. Because the Amish aren't smarter than other teenagers, they're not more inherently capable, they're just shaped by an environment that requires capability. And that's exactly what any teenager, anywhere, can develop if given the chance. The question isn't whether your teenager can learn what Amish teenagers learn. The question is whether you're willing to design an environment where learning like that becomes necessary. Because here's what I've realized after spending time in these communities. The smartphone isn't the enemy. The absence of real responsibility is. A device in the hand of someone with nothing to do will consume every hour. But a device in the hand of someone with real work, real goals, real problems to solve, it becomes a tool, not a master. Wait. I need you to hear this part clearly, because this changes everything. The Amish aren't avoiding smartphones because they think technology is evil. They're avoiding them because they've built a life where something better fills the gap. And that gap is competence. That gap is purpose. That gap is knowing you matter because you do things that matter. Most parenting advice tells you what to restrict. What Amish families show us is what to build toward instead. And now, here's the secret I promised you at the beginning of this video. It's not that Amish teenagers don't touch smartphones. It's that they've been given something better to do with their hands, their minds, and their time. They've been given responsibility. They've been given competence. They've been given the profound satisfaction of building something real. And that's infinitely more addictive than any app. The takeaway here is simple. If you want your teenager to stop reaching for a screen the moment they're bored, don't just take the screen away. Give them something better to reach for. Build the environment. Create the responsibility. Design the growth. Because the moment they experience what it feels like to actually make something, to actually solve something, to actually matter, the phone becomes optional. That's the real shift. Thanks so much for watching. This is exactly the kind of conversation I love having here on Forgotten Roots Survival, where we look at what the Amish and Plain communities are doing right and what the rest of us can learn and apply to our own lives. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. And if you've got thoughts on this, or your own experience with raising teenagers away from screens, drop a comment below. I read every one, and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one. End of part 3.